I'm Les from Tabletop Tastings, and today I'm interviewing Danielle Byrum, a game designer from Indiana with an upcoming Kickstarter project called Arrival Push, a Game of Vectors, where players take on the role of air traffic controllers. Danielle, welcome, and can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into game design?
I've been an avid gamer since I was a child. I loved playing games, and I've played all the basic games from Parker Brothers, and I played them to their end until my family refused to play with me. And then as an adult, uh, I started going to Gen Con every year. As soon as I turned 18, every single year I've gone to Gen Con, and it's been 17 years now. I love gaming. My board game collection, as you can see behind me, has grown enormously, and this is just what we have for this year. And we rotate out what we've got because we buy so much more at Gen Con every year. And it's a huge part of my family. I spend a lot of time gaming with my husband and a lot of time gaming with my children. It's a great way to connect with them. Game design is a new thing for me. I didn't even contemplate game design until a couple of years ago. I am an air traffic controller. I started in Fort Worth Center. A big part of my job in Fort Worth Center was sequencing arrivals for DFW. Very big airport, really high arrival rate. I would take 12 airplanes that were basically tied with each other. Going into the airport, they can't all land at the same time. They need to be spread out and lined up to arrive one at a time. Well, this was a mini game within my job, and I loved doing it. And it's so beautiful to see a sequence line up so beautifully. And it was certainly my favorite part of the job. But then I moved to Indianapolis, and Indianapolis doesn't really feed a specific large airport. So I lost the mini game within my job, and I miss it. I miss it incredibly. And so a couple of years at Gen Con, I was playing Honey Buzz of all things, and interacting with the hex grid in that manner just it gave me the idea of how I can make a game out of my job, moving across a hex grid. And for some reason, I just decided to make the game. I just missed sequencing so much that I made it mostly for myself to start, but people loved the idea. They wanted to see how I do what I do. And so I started sharing it and developing it more. And it's become this entire project. It's way bigger than I thought it would ever be.
And your game looks really, really cool. I love the passion for games you have. Just looking at the collection you've got in the background.
Yeah.
Little side question. Of the games you have, what's currently your favorite? What do you enjoy the most right now?
That is a really difficult question because the gaming is so complex and you have genres. If you want to ask a specific genre, then I might be able to give you an answer. But I pick a game based on a mood. It's how are we feeling today? What do we want to
Yeah.
do? What kind of mood are you in?
I love that approach. I try to keep a nice variety of game types too, just based on who's visiting as well.
Oh,
The
absolutely.
friend group that the short party games are the way to go, and then the other friend group that let's take 6 to 8 hours and break into Twilight Imperium and have a
Oh,
session.
absolutely. I mean,
Awesome.
I've got all of Arkham Horror back here too.
This is Tabletop Tastings, the perfect pairing of board games and whiskey tastings. Can you tell me, do you drink whiskey? And if so, what's your go-to whiskey?
It's a little cliche,
Okay.
but my favorite is Fireball,
Oh, nice.
cinnamon whiskey. Yeah.
It's
Well, I
delicious.
love cinnamon. I really do. I'm even trying to grow my own cinnamon tree. I have indoor plants. I have a lime tree, and I'm trying to grow a cinnamon tree, but it's proving more difficult than expected.
I guess I didn't even know cinnamon grew on a tree. So you're a few steps ahead of me there. How's that process
Yep.
going so far? Yeah.
I killed my first sapling. Um, the second one's doing a little bit better, I hope. The cinnamon is actually the bark of the tree. What you do is you cut off a limb and you shave it into very thin sheets. And
Hmm.
as it dries, it curls up into the cinnamon stick that you think of.
I love cinnamon. That's awesome. You started talking about your Kickstarter a little bit,
Yes.
Arrival Push, and I
Yeah.
understand you have experience being an air traffic controller, and you've talked a bit about the game already, but you're quite passionate about it. What makes your game special? Why is it going to be awesome?
So vectoring is very new to gaming. No game includes it in the way this does, where it's movement across a hex grid. Vectors are mathematics expression of direction and speed. So you have to move every aircraft every round, and you have to adjust where they're going and how quickly they're going in order to succeed. And it's such a new concept for players. Most players love it. The approval rating is 93 to 95%. Those that don't are generally those that aren't good at roundabouts. They struggle with the basic concept of a roundabout.
Okay, we know those people.
Yes. And so if you're comfortable with roundabouts, that's fantastic. You will love this game. If you struggle, I'm not sure you're going to like this game, which is okay. There's all kinds of games, but players get to interact in such a new way with board gaming. It's a very visual board game too. I keep making stop motion videos of the game because you can see how the game plays so well. Just as each thing moves across the board, as you maneuver the pieces, you can see everything. There's no hidden information in the game. I can see what I'm doing, I can see what my opponents are doing, and we're doing it simultaneously. All the aircraft move at the same time, and every aircraft moves every single round. There are no helicopters in this game.
Yeah, there's no pausing in the air. That makes
No, there's
perfect
not.
sense. Yeah.
And I didn't expect this to be such a question that comes up all the time. But when you turn an aircraft, it doesn't affect its speed. It still goes as far as it was going to go. So you can only turn so quickly. You
Mm.
can't stop in the air. I liken it to Power Grid. Power Grid is learning basic economics in a very kinetic way. This game teaches you mathematics and vectors in a kinetic fashion. You are moving your aircraft and you can see where they're moving and how they're going to move. You're applying vectors to them without even understanding what a vector truly is until you finish the game. And you've done it over and over again to a specific end result that is extremely satisfying. The win margins on the game are within several points. It's rare for a single player to run away with a game, which
Hmm.
is very interesting. The other part is it is semi-cooperative. The amount of airspace available to you as you get closer to the airport reduces because there's just less space for more airplanes. And how you play directly impacts the player next to you. So if the player next to you is struggling and you don't help them, it's going to hurt yourself. You have to cooperate. You're still trying to win, but you have to work together to be successful together.
Okay, that's awesome. How how closely does the game mirror the actual role of air traffic controlling?
That's interesting. There's no altitude in the game. The entire point of the game is to set up a sequence. So I do get the question all the time, well, if two aircraft can't be on the same hex, how do you do that in real life? Well, in real life, I would use one aircraft stacked above another one, and they would just pass each other. But in the game, if you are stacking your aircraft, you are missing the point of the game. So aircraft, no two aircraft can occupy the same space. The speeds are very relative. In order to do a difference between one aircraft doing 300 knots, another one doing 350, another one doing 420, you would have to move 10 or 15 hexes per turn, which is just impossible to display. So rather than do that, it's a very simple movement system where you move 1, 2, 3, or 4 hexes a turn. It's certainly exaggerated significantly, but it works. Players adjust speeds over and over again to maneuver the aircraft across the airspace. There are events that very closely mimic reality. We have emergencies on the aircraft, medevac flights, uncooperative passengers. Weather continues to build and dissipate for each player individually, and it's unpredictable. I actually had a meteorologist playtest the game, and he said it would be great if we could have forecast cards. I'm like, you know what? That's a great idea. There's a really good chance I'll include a forecast card in the game, but it's just going to be one. It's going to say weather might build, it might dissipate, or it might do nothing, and it'll be about as accurate as your forecast.
Yeah. That's great. And the game itself, to that point, it looks like you've been working on this for a couple of years now. How has it evolved since you first started?
When it first started, I had a giant hex grid map that D&D players usually use for campaigns. I got a giant package of Sharpies and I just colored different geographic regions to show how far away from the airport each aircraft was. An interesting thing that most people will understand pretty quick but don't realize ahead of time is that aircraft slow down the closer they get to the airport. Just like you slow down as you come off the highway, go through the city, get closer to your garage and park in your garage. So there is compression as everything gets closer. A way to depict the compression rather than have you a player count how far away the aircraft is from the airport each round, we just have different terrain zones that start at the center, and the next one out is a certain amount of hexes away from the airport is a city. A little further away is the river. Further than that is the grassland. When I first started the game, it was just a beautiful colors set, but it was just colors. And then I played with a couple of friends of mine who were colorblind, and they said there's no way they could play the game. Like, okay, so Gonna have to change that. Didn't even think about that. Terrains are a great way to fix that. And it's something people can relate to. It was also, you were doing three distinct arrival pushes. So it was actually only 3 rounds where you move in probably 8 to 10 aircraft. Actually, it started with 12. And that was entirely too cumbersome. Now we're down to 8 aircraft. That's about as much as players can handle in a game. And the game was a lot longer. There was more airspace. I've pared it down over and over again because people are not ready for the new complexities of the game and all the extra things I wanted to add in that mimic reality that could fit into the game, but are too much when you first start the game. A lot of things have been taken out of the game and put into mini expansion packs like military missions. A lot of players love the idea of having some fighter pilots going around your airspace. Not everybody wants to do that, and it's too much to include in the base game when players are just learning how to vector. So a lot of what I wanted to include in the game has been split off into mini expansions that you can choose to include if you want to. I started to join game design forums, and something that you see over and over again is you have to simplify your game to its bare bones as you're designing it, and then maybe build on it. But it's surprising how little it takes to make the game and to make it interesting
Yeah.
and bearable for players without being overwhelmed.
Kind of leans into my next question as well. But what's the biggest challenge of being a new game designer? What's the biggest challenge of game
Oh,
development
that's
so far?
actually really interesting. I am terrible at social media. I don't think like most people. And so there's a couple of aspects. I really have a hard time listening to people talk. So I don't do podcasts. I'm perfectly happy to read. I read blogs, but if there is a listening component, I seriously struggle with that. And so I find myself out of touch with what all of my fellow board gamers are seeing on a regular basis, what they want to see. And so I'm guessing, and my darts are just missing the board entirely. And then when you're interacting online, you don't have tone. You have emojis, which is a hieroglyph system that I have yet to understand. I use maybe 3 emojis, and I tone is very difficult for me. And I find that I'm not connecting with people online the way that I see them connect with each other. And then I am a person with emotions, and uh,
Online
when I
people are jerks
interact,
sometimes. Yeah.
well, I don't think they intend to be. I
Hmm.
just take it a little too harsh. I'm my biggest critic. You've seen what we've done for the game, and at no point have I accepted anything less than excellence, either for myself or anybody else who I hire to work on the game. And so when I get feedback, I do my best, not just to take it to heart, but to implement it, to find how I can make it better, make the game better, make what I'm doing better, make it what people would want to play,
And
want
how
to
do you
have.
do then with like that struggle of, getting good advice and implementing it, but sometimes people have bad advice as well.
Yes, that is actually incredibly difficult. Whose advice do I take?
Mm.
I even have disagreements with my artist. Wonderful person and an industry expert, which is fantastic, but I have to balance his advice with my vision for the
Yeah.
game. And so when I get different advice online, it might be that everybody creates advertisements in a specific manner and people are used to seeing them in that way. But does that mean my advertisement should look like theirs? And do I want them to blend in with every other advertisement they're seeing, or do I strive to stand out? It's interesting trying to take advice and figure out how to make it work for me and if it can even work for me, if it should work for me.
Well, I think what you've got so far looks fantastic, and I am
Oh,
very
thank you.
excited to try this game. I will back it as well. I think it looks super cool. For those that want to learn more about Arrival Push, a game of vectors, when does your Kickstarter begin?
We are aiming for May of this year, but it is very complicated with marketing and advertising. And we have talked to the board game publisher and we've talked to distributors. We have gotten through all of that. But before we can launch, we need a certain amount of backing of people who are interested and will likely back. And so I'm trying to gain that following, but it is proving very difficult for me as a person. And I'm also looking at hiring people to help me with it, but it's also hard to find people with the right expertise that communicate in the same way I do.
Mm.
Because if you struggle just to talk to each other, accomplishing something is a much larger feat. So while I would love to commit to saying we're going to launch on May of this year, I'm not sure. And I don't want to provide something, anything short of excellence for this game. I don't want players to not be able to get the stretch goals that I intend to include because we don't get the backing that the game deserves, that the players deserve. So I hope to do May, but it might be later this year.
Excellent. And if people want to follow your game or your other projects that you have on the go that look really neat as well, but we haven't had a chance to talk about, how can they find you? What are your socials?
The name of our game company is Pushing Tin Games, reflective of the air traffic control game, although we have 4 other games that are not related to air traffic control. And after this first ATC game, we're going to have 4 more air traffic control games about the other elements of flight related to air traffic control. So you can find us on Facebook with Pushing Tin Games. Instagram is Pushing Tin Games. We have a website, pushingtingames.com. We also have a TikTok where you can see a very unfortunate video of me showing everybody what would happen if I did my job the way people think I do my job with the cones that really don't work with airplanes 30,000 feet in the
Yeah.
sky. It's funny. But I make an absolute fool of myself to show everybody that that's really not what an air traffic controller does.
Well, Danielle, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to meet with us. My name is Les. I've been interviewing Danielle Byrum of Pushing Tin Games with the Kickstarter launching later this year called Arrival Push, a Game of Vectors. Thank you so much, Danielle.
And thank you too, Les.